Welcome to this week's episode of Pondering Play and Therapy with me, Philippa. And this week, my guest is Dr. Sharon Giblin, and she is a consultant clinical psychologist with over 25 years of working with children and families. And this week, I've asked Sharon to come along and talk a little bit about attachment and the attachment cycle, about shame and guilt, and about PACE, which is playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy, which we've touched on over the last 8 months. So, welcome, Sharon, and thank you to the podcast. Thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Philippa. It's really nice to be here.
Clinical psychologist, that always sounds really posh to me. That when somebody says you're a clinical psychologist, I'm like, oh God, they're so clever. They know all this stuff. How it's quite a long training process. But I don't think when I was at school, I ever knew anyone who said they were going to be a clinical psychologist. People do psychology, but it's a lot more than a psychology degree, isn't it? How did you end up being a clinical psychologist?
Well, I'm not really sure at school. I don't really think I knew what a clinical psychologist was. So, how I got into psychology was I took a GCSE psychology course alongside my school GCSE ones just because we were interested in it. And that makes me sound like, yeah, oh, really, brainy. But no, I wasn't doing well in all my psychology, all my GCSEs. But this one I was interested in. And my school didn't do GCSE psychology, so took it out of interest really. And then that probably was the door open to psychology. And then I couldn't take it at A level because my college didn't do it for A level. And actually, I was hoping to be a historian and archaeologist. And that's what I thought I was going to go on to study in. But I had a change of heart and ended up applying for psychology degrees, which were open to me because I had done a GCSE in it, even though I hadn't done an A level. And then I guess whilst being on the psychology degree, they then explained to you how you can use psychology in future careers. And it was from then I learned about clinical psychology. And actually, I wanted again to be a forensic psychologist first of all. And I did a placement as part of my undergraduate course, which was both forensic and clinical, and decided I liked the clinical more. And it was from then that I thought, okay, I'd like to be a clinical psychologist. So after my undergraduate degree, you then have to get on to do a postgraduate degree to do clinical psychology. And usually you have to be an assistant psychologist first, which is in between your undergraduate and getting on the doctorate course. So it is a long process, but it's an interesting one, is what I would say.
And I guess in some ways, certainly because you and I have worked together and have done similar work, in some ways, you are a historian, aren't you? You do look at people's histories. It's very specific, but there is history is really important in what we do, and
Yes.
certainly as a psychologist, I imagine.
I think you're absolutely right. I once had a colleague say to me that archaeology is about the study of sort of dead people's lives, and psychology is really about studying people who are still with us and talking about their histories and their stories and where that comes from. But you're absolutely right. It's about the stories of people, isn't it? And that's what's fascinating about the work we do, I think, together is people's stories.
And it's an honor, really, isn't it, to be able to listen to somebody's story, somebody's narrative, and that they will share that sometimes quite painful things that have happened in their lives. They will share it, whether they're little people right through to adults, really.
Absolutely. I think honor is a really good word for it, isn't it? When people are brave enough to be vulnerable and share some of the difficult stuff and some of the good stuff in their lives as well, and to come and talk about that with you. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to hear that and to be able to help them make sense with stuff and to be trusted that way.
And some of that history is thinking about their attachment, isn't it? Which is the relationship that they had with a caregiver when they were a baby and a toddler.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
do you want to just explain a little bit about the attachment cycle and why it's important?
Attachment is the absolutely, like you say, it's that absolutely fundamental human need to be in relationship with a caregiver. When we think about babies when they're being grown in the womb, and then when they're born, their babies, human babies, are 100% dependent on their caregiver. So they cannot exist without having that relationship. And attachment and the attachment cycle is about how that bond is formed and how that bond, actually what we know now, really creates the baby's brain, actually, and brain functioning. So that attachment cycle is something that happens millions of times a day between the baby and the carer. And I guess what we mean by attachment cycle is where the baby signals and it feels something, whether it's hunger or tired or bored or pain, and it has a need, and it signals the need to the caregiver, and then the caregiver, usually your parent, carer, or grandparent, whoever's there, will then look at the baby and figure out, oh, hang on, the baby needs some attention, the baby has a need, figure out what that is, and then meet the need in the baby, whether it's change the nappy or burp the baby or rock the baby or play with the baby. And then the baby feels understood and has had its need met and can relax and feel cared for. And also the parent can, or the carer can feel like they've done a good job, and can feel like, I've done a good job leaving the baby's had its needs met. That feels really good. So it's a process for both parent and child. It's a relationship between them.
And that continues, doesn't it? Whether you're a toddler in mid-age, teenager, adult, we still go through that cycle with important people.
Absolutely. So that cycle happens as a baby, thousands of times a day or a week with the carer, but it's still happening when they're 3, when they're 5, when they're 7. They might just communicate their signals differently. You know, a 5-year-old's going to have words and is going to be able to talk, but also will still cry or will scream or have those sorts of responses. And it's still the carer's job to try and figure out what that really means and what the child wants, and then meet the need for the child so that they can go around that cycle again. And then, as you say, that goes right on through to adulthood, doesn't it? We think about our teenage years, we might be like coming in from school and being grumpy and slamming doors, and it's up to our parents to go, either don't slam the door, oh, hang on, they've had a bad day, let's go and figure out what's happened, or why have they slammed the door, It's those kind of signals right through to, as well, adults and in our adult partnerships. It's when we're coming from work or we're getting stuck with something, how does our partner recognise that we need something and help us through that, really?
And there's very basic needs, isn't there, that you need from a baby right through to an adult that we would want to be consistently met, really. So like food, shelter, those sorts of things. Even as a teenager, you still need to be fed, sometimes quite a lot, from my recollection. With my kid, there was a lot of food went in at times. Sleep, which, is really important all the way through. And sometimes it changes a little bit. And as caregivers, we can feel a little bit out of sorts in that cycle, do you think? Whereas a teenager, they start to go to sleep a little bit later because that's naturally what they are meant to do. But as a parent or a caregiver, you might think they need to go to sleep at 10 and they're not going to sleep till 1. And that can wobble that attachment cycle, can it, a little bit?
Oh, sure. I think that's an absolute classic one, isn't it? You're describing there is where the teenagers' biochemistry is really telling them to go to bed later and to get up later. But often there's things like school demands that they need to get up. So they need to be going to bed early enough in order to get up early enough. And then it's on the parents to get them up and out to school. And that can create lots of conflict, can't it? And then the parent often might not know about the biochemistry changes that happens during teenage years. That means that they are going to find it harder to fall asleep, but also want to stay asleep for longer. They sleep a long time, like toddlers do, really, don't they? So, because their brain's going through such a phase of changing during those teenage years, it requires a lot more rest in order for that to happen. But yeah, so that can then put some tensions on some of that cycle, part of that attachment cycle, because it's like the child has a need, but the parent is like, how does the parent meet the need when it might be at odds with getting them up for school on time and creating frustrations in the relationship for each other.
Yeah. And if you've had, I suppose, if you've been able to go through that attachment cycle on a consistent basis, and then there's these moments of rupture, and because those might go on for several weeks or several months, mightn't they? From my experience, I think it felt like about 2 years when my kid was kind of 13 and 14. I was like, are we ever going to get to the end of this? Where it feels like there's this constant conflict going on. Yeah. Does that mean then that we've broken the attachment?
Yeah, I guess it can sometimes feel like it gets really sticky, can't it? Is that what you're thinking about? And it can feel like all you're doing is butting up against this real sort of tension, can't it? And that can be really tricky, because then all the child can feel is a bit got at and criticised, and all the parent can feel like they're doing is they're nagging and berating, and the joy can go out of the relationship, actually. And some of the playfulness and the care that seemed to happen when they were younger can feel like it's gone for a bit. And I think a lot of the families I've worked with have talked about when they've hit the teenage years that it's much harder to connect with their teenagers in that moment, because the teenager naturally wants to spend more time with friends and spend more time on their own in their rooms. There's less opportunities for the nice caregiving stuff, and much more opportunity for that kind of relationship rupture that you're talking about there, where there can be conflicts and arguments as well. So it can get tricky.
Does that then mean, though, that the attachment has been broken, and that actually it's been damaged irreparably, and that because the teenagers, not all, but some will say, I hate you, I don't want to be here, such and such's mum's just so much better than you. When I leave home, I'm never coming back. And it can feel like a massive rejection, can't it? And you put all this work in, done all this stuff, and then all of a sudden there's this rejection. And is that kind of breaking that attachment that you've built? Is it damaged, or can it weather it?
I would say that absolutely no, it's not automatically broken. I would say it's challenged. I think the rupture is definitely the right word, but with rupture there can always be repair. I guess I would say that the stronger the relationship seemed to have been when they were younger, perhaps the easier it is to weather these things. Would you agree with that? Your experience? Yeah. So if things have been rocky when they're younger, for many reasons that can happen, can't it? Because of illness or situations happening that can make things rockier, then that might make weathering the teenage stuff a bit more difficult. But I would always say that it's about how you go to repair that relationship, and also having that we can have the longer term view that the child might not be able to, that this is a phase, it's a stage. It might feel like a very long one. Like you thought 2 years, all right. Like, yeah, it's a very long phase. They're not going to be the same at 15 as they are at 17, as they are at 21, as they are at 25. People change and grow and develop. I think there is always that future relationship that you can aim towards for the caring and getting it there. Yeah.
So you mentioned that maybe when children are younger, that attachment cycle the meeting of that need hasn't always been consistent for whatever reason. So that can create what I guess it generally is called an insecure attachment, can't it? When maybe for whatever reason, from in the womb, from when they were babies, the toddlers, there's something that disrupts that, that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
About the things that can disrupt the attachment
Yeah,
style.
and what,
Yeah.
I guess, what impacts it as well? What impacts that then can have on the children and the young people as they grow?
Yeah. So the kind of things that often impact that attachment cycle happening is if there isn't perhaps consistent enough care from the caregiver and the child, and that might happen for a whole host of reasons. One of them is if the child is ill and it has to be in hospital, and can the parent stay with them? Can the parent be with them all the time? Or are they having multiple carers, like nursing staff caring for them? How much touch are they getting? Jim, you've spoken about the importance of touch on this podcast previously. Those kind of, if children are very physically unwell, there might be some difficulties in being able to touch them as a baby normally would, and rocked and soothed, and all those things that help that attachment bond and that attachment cycle grow, that can get in the way. And then, of course, there might be situations where children can't stay in the families that they were born into, when they're having to move, and they might have to move more than once from their birth families into emergency foster care, and then from emergency foster care into foster placement, and then from the foster placement sometimes into another foster placement or into an adoptive family, perhaps. And that is all, might be all very good care they've had, but the fact that they've had a series of different adult carers caring for them naturally interrupts the child's ability to be able to form a secure bond with an adult.
Even if they were babies, though, even if they're tiny babies and they can't remember it, does it still affect them?
Yes, I think what we've learned more in more recent sort of decades or so is that there is memories are laid down in what the body feels. It's a felt sense of memory rather than the memories that we might know, which is cognitive and it's got pictures and it's got words to it, it's got a story to it. That can happen later on when you've got language and you can remember those things. But as babies, it's a felt sense, isn't it? It's a felt sense of predictability, of safety, of knowing that if I make a signal, if I have a need, it's going to be predictably met, and that the carer is going to understand me and treat me kindly, and I'm going to be safe and I'm not going to be hurt. That isn't the experience for every young person, every baby that's born, unfortunately, for many reasons. And if they don't have that predictable, routine, consistent, good enough care, I think we call it good enough, not perfect, but that good enough kind of care from an adult carer, where they can learn that adults are safe and predictable and will meet their need, then the child then struggles to make attachment bonds later on.
Yeah. I often think about just a simple act of having your nappy changed. And if, you're having your nappy changed, it starts in a certain way, doesn't it? So it might be that with me, they're laid down on a changing mat, and then I gather all the things, and then I do it in one way, and then there's a middle bit to it where you attune to that child or the baby, don't you? They might be grumpy, so you are doing oh, don't worry, it's nearly done, we're going to get dinner, and you're doing the soothing and the empathy. Or they might be playful, so you're giving them their socks or their tights to play with, so you're tuning in the middle bit, aren't you? And then they don't like the touch of the cream, and you do a bit of empathy, and then it ends in a certain way. And I think that is like the rhythm of life. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you go through it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day, over and over again. And I suppose when you've got the same caregiver or the same two caregivers doing it, then you start to embody, don't you, that, oh, they're lying me on the mat, I feel uncomfortable, but they've laid me on this mat, and now that uncomfortable awfulness is going to go. But if you move to a house, then maybe the next person changes you on their lap. So you've started to build that rhythm of, okay, so this is what it likes when I feel uncomfortable. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I'm going to feel better, and I'm going to be played with. But now you've got that feeling, and you're laid on their lap, or you're you're a little bit older, so some people do it standing up. I don't know how people do it standing up, but some people do it standing up. There's lots of different ways that you change a nappy, isn't there?
Yeah.
In a lot of different, and so that, I guess, that rhythm that you learn about, that beginning, middle, and end, that predictable, consistent understanding of
Yeah.
connection of changes, doesn't it? It's not that the changing of the nappy is any better or worse in any of those households, whether it's on your knee, whether it's on a certain mat, whether it's on the floor. They're all meeting that baby's need, but it's almost like it doesn't, the babies will struggle to understand, okay, so this is going to be okay and safe. It feels unsafe, I imagine, that all of a sudden you know on someone's knee would.
Yeah. I think absolutely. And I think that consistency and routine is about what builds that sense of safety and security, isn't it? And I think we know now that even starts in the womb, doesn't it? So babies can get very familiar with their mother's voice in the womb and differentiate that voice to other people's voices. So then when they're born, they already have that bond, that familiarity with the birth mother in the room. So if any of that sort of interrupted at that point, that can be disruptive for the child. So if babies can't stay with their birth mothers and are immediately taken, we used to think their babies, they'll never know, they'll never remember that. But actually we know now that in itself is a big rupture, isn't it? Because we know that they've already had 9 months of familiarity with that voice and the heartbeat and the smell and the sight and all that sort of stuff comes from being grown in the womb, really.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess just moving that on a little bit, and another thing I suppose the attachment cycle does is move children and babies from shame into guilt. So can you just talk us a little bit about shame and the purpose of shame, and I guess why we don't want our children to stay in shame?
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? I think we understand that shame is one of these sort of key emotions that we can feel, one of the earliest emotions that we can feel, along with happy and sad and angry, and those kind of feelings. Shame is also there too. And it's a really horrible feeling, isn't it? Shame. It's that feeling of being really vulnerable and exposed and feeling people are looking at us and are thinking negatively about us and that we've done something, something was really bad is happening. It's really frightening feeling and an awful feeling in us. And we can feel that really early on as children. So very minor stuff, yeah? I actually remember my first instance of shame as a child. One of them I remember I was preschool, I'd been dropped to nursery and my mum was going off to work and I didn't want my mum to leave. And I remember getting very upset and kicking and screaming. I mean, kicking and screaming like this. And she picked me up and she's handing me over to the nursery people outside the nursery and they're having to take me and I'm kicking and screaming. And then the bit that I remember the shame about is later on, I think I was playing at a water sort of table in the sand table quite happily. And the person came along and said to me, "Are you okay now?" So it was a kind sort of statement, but I remember feeling that shame of feeling like having created a big scene or done something really silly. Yeah. And I'm not even sure, I don't remember the adults particularly saying, "Oh, you were really silly," or "Stop it." But I wonder if they were maybe in the handing over, just like, "Don't worry, you'll be fine." Maybe they were dismissing my distress at that point. I can't really remember the words. I just remember the feeling of shame when she came over and said, "Are you okay?" Because I think it was paired with, "I am okay, so why was I making such a fuss?"
Yeah.
I think there was a shame about that. So I think children feel shame all the time about stuff that happens. If they break something, they might immediately feel ashamed they've broken something. And I think what you were talking about there is how is that handled with the caregiver is really important.
But can we just go back? Because shame is, I am bad, isn't it? That's how it's internalized into. I am a bad person, so I did something wrong, rather than this thing happened that wasn't okay. Is that
Yes, I think
right?
that's the difference between the shame and the guilt feeling. I think we feel like the guilt feeling is the more developed feeling that comes out of these things. So shame is that feeling of I'm bad, I'm wrong, this is awful, I'm the wrong thing here. Whereas guilt is more of a feeling of I've done a bad thing, which feels a bit different, doesn't it? And I've done a bad thing and it's had an impact on someone else, but it also means I can maybe do something about it. Whereas actually shame is that feeling of I am the bad thing. What can you do about that other than feel awful? I am the bad thing. I think what happens developmentally is when children have these natural shame experiences for these everyday occurrences that happen, they can experience the shame. And as long as the caregiver is able to offer a kind and empathic and understanding response to that, like going, oh dear, you were really upset, or oh dear, don't worry, we all break things. Come on then, let's clear it up together. It's okay. Then that will then move the child from shame into a, oh, oops, I did a bad thing, but it's okay. I can do something about it. But if the caregiver isn't for some reason able to do that, or isn't around, or actually, in fact, continues the shame by saying, you're really naughty, you shouldn't have done that, don't drop that tea everywhere, you're a bad kid, then that internalizes that shame.
Mm.
And if a child is left in those kind of situations for too often and too long as a child, where actually they're not having a helpful repair to their shame experiences, then that can lead to that feeling of deeply feeling shame that I'm a bad person, I'm unlovable, I'm unwanted, I can't do anything, those kind of feelings.
Yeah. So I guess like when I was growing up, things like the naughty step and those kind of stuff, I remember being told at school to go and stand outside the classroom and face the wall. I was outside the classroom quite a lot at points in my school life. But actually, that is quite shaming, isn't it? Because you're left with it. You haven't got anybody to help you. I was really lucky because I had a balance in that I was really good at sport. So I had lots and lots of positive affirmation through my sport. So being sent outside and standing in the classroom actually got me quite a bit of kudos. But I had a lot of resilience because I had a huge amount of positive praise from being good at sport. But I imagine if you haven't got that buffer,
Mm.
being sent away to be on your naughty step or stand outside or whatever it is, you're left with that feeling, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's right, Philippa. And school systems, I think, rely a lot on those kind of shame-based strategies to try and help children behave and stick to the rules. But how they impact on the child can very much depend on exactly what you're saying there, Philippa, is what else is in the child's life. So for someone who does have a lot of other positive relationships and other good things going alongside, then being stuck out in the corridor for a bit on their own with people walking past probably is okay, might not be the best, but it's not going to be the worst thing for them. And like you say, gave you a bit of kudos, maybe, yeah. But if we think about a child that has had a very difficult start in life and is actually struggling to feel like they belong anywhere, struggling to feel like they belong in the family that they're in, struggling to figure out how to make friendships, struggling with all those kinds of, much bigger issues that children can get. And then they struggle to stay in the classroom and struggle to keep to the rules because they've got so many other needs as well that need to be met. That learning is well below. They're still trying to figure out if they're safe in this world and if they can make connection. So if they're then sent out the room, then that for them might feel really rejecting and really othering, and it might be much more damaging for them being sent out the room, and then is much more likely to produce more shame-based behaviour, which might be problematic for the school, rather than them going, oh, I won't do that, I'll behave.
Mm.
So it's not a great system for school or for children, really.
So say shame-based behaviour, what do you mean by that? What is shame-based behaviour?
I guess we can see when shame's been triggered in children when they behave in sort of ways where I think it's Miriam Silver, isn't it? We can put her book up at the end, can't we? But she talks about the shield of shame. So carrying a shield to try and protect yourself from feeling shame. And within that, children can tell lies. So just say that it wasn't them, they didn't do it. They can blame other people. It wasn't me, it was Billy that did that, and totally believe that it wasn't them that did it. They can minimize the impact of their behavior. Oh, it was just one bite, it wasn't the whole thing, so it doesn't matter if I've stolen someone's sweets or something. And anger as well. So if all that kind of fails, and often there's an anger response, which is a way of defending themselves and keeping other people away, isn't it? And they can just be raging and angry. And often those behaviours are ones that as adults we don't like to see in children. They're the ones that attract consequences and that get parents and adults really worried and schools really worried. If a child's lying and deceitful and minimising and angry, that creates lots of problems. It gets them into more trouble. And then they end up back out in the corridor again.
Yeah. And I wonder if sometimes, I'm just thinking about I think it's Dan Hughes that does the Shield of Shame.
Okay.
I don't know, but I'll check and we'll put it at the end whether it's Miriam. But Miriam Silver does do a great book, doesn't she? Which is
it's in her book, the Shield's drawing it out. Maybe Dan talks about it and Miriam maybe.
Yeah, I think she does. Is it Attachment in Doodles?
Yes, yeah.
So we'll put that book because it is a great book as well. We're going to come on to talk about Dan Hughes in a minute. But I suppose I just wondered that deny, minimize, blame, and then the rage. Sometimes, I guess what we're talking about here is that children maybe haven't developed into the guilt stuff about being able to separate themselves from their behavior. I remember there was I'm just going to tell you a little story and then I'm going to move on to my point. But when my son was little, it's probably about 4, and I was learning about all this stuff. So I was really into, it's not him, it's the behavior. You need to correct the behavior, you need to praise the behavior, you need to do all this stuff. And he was at preschool just before going into reception, and his preschool teacher had told him off, and he'd said to her, Mrs. blah blah blah, you really should be correcting my behavior and not me. And so I was called into class for him, into nursery for him being cheeky, and I was like, oh, he's right. You know. Well, it just makes me laugh. But I suppose what I'm thinking is that sometimes we can see that resurface in teenagers again, can't we? That shame response, where maybe because their brain then is resetting and they're very emotional, so they might have been able to do that separation, but then there's all of a sudden where it feels that they feel that we are getting at them, that we're ruining their fun, that we're doing this on purpose, and you can get some of that minimizing, that lying, that blaming. It's your fault. If you hadn't said, then I would never have done. And some of that is, I guess, they've got the foundations of guilt and all those sorts of things, but all of a sudden there's this reboot in their brain and they're having to relearn a little bit of these things. And really what's left is that emotional center.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it all out. Yeah, absolutely. Teenagers, does they go back through some of that separation? And I think what triggers it is, as you've said, as a toddler, part of the reason why toddlers can get quite difficult is they are beginning to assert themselves as little individuals and want to make decisions, and they're more mobile, and so they're beginning to do that first bit of separation from being the really dependent babe in arms. They're now able to move about, aren't they? And then that feels like a similar trigger to when you get to the teenage years, which is all about actually separating yourself from your core family and turning outwards towards your peers and trying to figure out who you are and who you want to belong to. So I think it does seem to have a similar sort of trigger point for those. And if there are things that have gone on from younger that are unresolved, they can often surface again as teenagers, can't they? And teenagers are very, because they're going through all that change and they're trying to figure out who they are and everything's a bit uncertain, they become very self-conscious, and they also are trying to figure out who they are as well, aren't they? So it's a very difficult process for them. So that can be in itself quite shame-inducing and make them feel more vulnerable as individuals, and like you say, much more sensitive to criticism and all those kind of dynamics go on.
So then how do we parent through this or teach through this? What is helpful?
The first rule would be that we need to think about when we're dealing with our young people and teenagers, if we try and think about how we can not activate shame responses and try and avoid those as much as possible. That is not the same as saying we're going to avoid implementing boundaries or consequences. Children still need those, especially, and teenagers especially do need those too. But it's maybe about how we choose to do it. And it's about the language perhaps that we choose. And a really good attitude to take is the Dan Hughes approach, isn't it? That I think you've mentioned on here about being about the PACE approach, being playful, being accepting of where your young person is at in the moment, being really curious about what their experience is and providing lots of empathy for their experience as well. And then with that, you can then use that attitude of pacefulness to put alongside any boundaries or consequences that you need to do in order to help shape the behaviour to keep the young person safe or put them back on the right course. But you can try to do it in a really non-shaming way.
Which I guess is easier said than done, isn't it? Because when we're parents, we want an outcome. This is what I think. We are going to go in and we're going to be open to our teens or our 7-year-old or our 5. We're going to hope they've had whatever it is, and we're going to go in and we're just going to have a conversation. But I think that we are going in to just have a conversation in the hope that we get our outcome. So with our teens, we're going in to just have the conversation and hope that our conversation then leads to them doing their homework or going to bed on time, or the 5-year-old putting the pajamas on, and that really isn't what PACE is about, is it?
I think that's the tension, isn't it? Is that we, like you say, we want to be task focused and outcome orientated as our parents because we've got certain things that need to happen. But actually, PACE is more about taking the time and helping the young person explore what they're thinking and feeling about a situation, validating it with them and for them, having empathy for their situation, and then moving them to think about what can they be doing about that. And thinking about it together. So it's more of a collaborative kind of process. And it takes a lot more time, which is often the thing that trips us up as parents because we're on time frames and we need to get out the door and we need to do this and we need to go to bed because they're going to be tired. So we find it hard to keep our cool and to keep it calm and to give enough time to have those paceful conversations. And also the important part about all this, when we're thinking about play and pondering play and therapy, is about keeping things playful and light as much as possible. I think that's a really key part of trying to keep children out of shame. Because when you are playful and light and things are joyful, that is activating a different part of the brain to the shame, the part that is activated when children are in shame, really. So if you can keep things light touch, playful, and joyful, you're going to be really helping that young person with their thinking.
And I guess using empathy, because we can use empathy, it's almost a bit like a superpower, isn't it? Because you can use it in so many different situations. So you can be putting a boundary and a consequence in place. So in none of this are we suggesting that we just let our kids get on with it and that we don't say actually that wasn't okay, or yes, you need to do your homework. Or I guess there's a point where you pick your battles, and in my view, some battles aren't worth having. Homework was one that I really never felt was a battle I wanted to have in my house. I wanted to spend time with my kid and enjoy my kid and not be arguing about whether they had completed their history homework or not. I would prompt them, but for me, that was just a battle that I just wasn't going to have. There was other things that were really important to me, that those are the boundaries and structures. So no point in using pace or any of this stuff are we saying. You just let your kids get on with it, and you can use empathy, can't you, about even when you're putting a consequence in place. So, you can say it's now time to switch off your tablet or your tally, and you're going to get a thing. So using empathy, you would do that maybe first and say, I know this is going to be really frustrating, or you're going to be a bit upset now. However, we are going to switch we're going to switch the tablet off. So holding, and does that then help to keep, again, them out of shame and keep that connection as far as possible?
Absolutely. I think what you're talking about there is prioritizing the relationship above other sort of demands as well. And I think that is absolutely key with our young people, because if you can keep your relationship intact with them or connected with them, they're much more likely for a start to listen to you. Because as soon as they feel that rupture in that relationship, they feel like you're getting at them or you're telling them off, and they're going to start to escalate. It's going to trigger themselves into perhaps a sort of a fight or a flight kind of response. It's going to be much harder to then have them listen to what you want them to do, and you'll end up in a conflict and a row. But by predicting, I know this, I'm going to ask you something really difficult. I'm going to ask you, you need to turn your tablet off. And then, it's going to be really hard. And we do need you to get your sleep, because otherwise you'll be tired in the morning. You can try and do it in an empathic way to try and prevent that escalating.
Yeah.
And give them a bit of time to say, oh, for God's sake, Mum, I don't want to do that now. And have some tolerance for that, and not then just jump down and say, don't be cheeky or do as you're told, or those that we might want to do and we might think would give a good outcome. But actually, that normally just escalates stuff, doesn't it? With the young people that we work with. And you want to just be able to tolerate some of their grumpiness about it, because, of course, going to bed is much more boring than carrying on playing their game with their mates.
And I wonder, sometimes I used to use it about giving a choice about when we would have this conversation. So if I needed to talk about school because maybe the homeworks weren't done, or I needed to talk about we need to go out at the weekend, and I know you're not going to want to do that, or I knew the conversation was going to be a little bit difficult, then I would almost prepare that and use the empathy around. I need to give you some information. It's going to be a little tricky for you to hear. I need you to be able to hear everything I've got to say before you respond. Can we do that now? Or do you want to do it in half an hour? So I would boundary it. So it wasn't like we're not going to do it, but I would say, do you want to do it now? Or do you want to have a snack and do it in half an hour? So there's also that processing time, because certainly as teens, their processing is reduced. Is that right?
I think to bring up processing is a really good point, Philippa, because often I think we make a demand on a child and then we expect them to act immediately. But actually, they do need time to understand what you've said, to think about it, to have their response to it, and then to be able to do it, don't they? And all that it varies from young person to young person, perhaps as well, and what space they're in at the time as well. If they're in a really energetic, good mood, they might be able to respond much more quickly. But if they're actually in a really difficult place, they might need a lot more processing time as well. Absolutely. I think you've got to be aware where your young person is at and give them some space as well between being asked to do something. And I really like that sort of technique that you're using there about preparing them for the information. We're going to do that in a bit, and then giving them a choice about when they engage with that. I think,
and I guess that's the same for 5-year-olds, isn't it? When we give lots of instructions, they can't process all that, can they? One instruction at a time. And then I think that also gives you the opportunity to praise, rather than 4 instructions in one go and they only do 2. And then you don't notice the 2 they've done. You tell them off for the 2 they didn't. Whereas if you do one at a time, you can give them 4 bits of praise, can't you? Which is really nice, I think.
Yeah. And it makes it doable, and it makes them feel like they're not overwhelmed and that they can achieve this. And also they can see that they're doing as they're asked, which actually most children do want to do that. They want to know that they're doing okay, don't they?
As we just wrap up, because we could talk about this for forever, what would be, if you had to give parents, school teachers, people working with me, what would be your 3 top tips? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but 3 top tips.
The top tip is focus on your connection with your young person. So make sure that is in place. Make sure they feel liked by you. Make sure that you can enjoy something about them. But make sure that you have that connection, because if you have that in place already, then any time you need to put in a boundary or make a demand on them, it's going to withstand that rupture or that slight conflict much easier. Yeah. So if you don't have that in place yet, then just forget everything else and just play with them or do activities with them or get to know them. Get that in place first, that's what I would say for one. And then I would say, think carefully about trying not to induce any shame responses from them. Yeah. So that is about giving them as much power and control as you can over interactions and being as respectful with them as you'd want them to be with you in some respects as well. I think sometimes we trip into treating children like children and expect them to do as we ask just because we're adults and both the girls. But some of our kids need a bit more help than that to understand why they're being asked to do something, and they need a bit more time to buy in to do that. I think it's about figuring out what your language is, as being really careful around how you're asking children to do things.
So I suppose my tip, I'll do the last one then. So you've done those 2. So the relationship, which is really important. The second one, I think you're right, is that kind of how we're asking, what we're doing, because we can be tentative, can't we? But still clear. And that would be my last one, is know the difference between a question and a negotiation and an instruction, because we give instructions as questions. And if you say to your kid, do you want a shower? That is a question. And if they say no, then you have to abide by that. You've asked them a question, they've said no, so then you need to abide by it. If it is that you want them to have a shower, then I suppose building on your second point is you can be really clear about you are going to have a shower. You can give a little bit of, you're going to have a shower tonight. Are you going to have it now? Are you going to have it later? Are you going to have a shower or a bath or something? You can give a little bit of choice within it, but the overall responsibility is you, because I think often we ask questions and what we mean is an instruction. And then we get into conflict when our children answer the question. And then when we ask questions and we really mean it, our kids can't answer and we say, well, answer me. But they don't know if this is a question or an instruction. And how anxiety provoking is that? Imagine going to your boss and they're asking you a question and you're thinking, are you tricking me? Or are you tricking me? And if I say something, you're going to shout at me. So that's what I would say, is know the difference between a negotiation, which is a question, and an instruction, which you're not going to negotiate on. For any child, whether they're 18 months, because we think we're being nice, don't we? Do you want to? Shall we? But actually, you don't mean shall we? You mean you are going to do it.
Yeah. And that can just invoke feelings of frustration in the child, can't it? Because when you say shall we, and you're making it nice, but they actually know what that really means is you're going to make me do it. And that can be frustrating. It's much better to be clear, isn't it? To say, today you need to take a shower, so let's think about how you're going to do it. And that's where playfulness can come in, can't it, as well? Because then you can go, okay, let's see, do you want the green foamy soap for this, or do you want the blue foamy soap? Or you can introduce fun things with it to help them get over perhaps a bump of, oh, I have to go and have a shower. Something like that. Or you can, if they're an older kid, you can say, I'll make sure you've got a hot chocolate ready when you get out, or something like that. And you can, what they call it, delivery, or they call it rewarding positive behaviour. Take your pick.
I think even like with a teenager, you can still race them up the stairs, can't you?
Yeah.
You can still say, I can get up there quicker than you, my legs are long. And you can still do that kind of playfulness around that. Or we're going to tidy your room today. Let's see who can pick the most odd socks up. You can still bring playfulness within those, but they are instructions, aren't they? They are, this is what you're going to do. It's not, are you going to tidy your room today? It's, you are going to tidy your room today. I'll help you. Let's see who can pick up the most odd socks. Let's see. And then don't go into the shame bit of, look what's under your bed. And it's really hard as a parent because it is frustrating, I know. So, yeah. Thank you so much, Sharon. That has been such a great conversation that I'm sure we could have talked more and more about. And hopefully you'll come back and add to this. So thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been really nice talking with you, Philippa.